Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and today we're going to be discussing common word problems. Essentially, these are a list of problems that come up in our computer lab more than others with regards to patrons using Microsoft Word 2016. Skill-wise, I would say most of what we're covering today would fit into the intermediate category, and I have discussed many of these topics before, but because they come up so more often than the rest, I wanted to collect them all into one video. The question I probably hear the most in the computer lab with regards to using Microsoft Word is, how do I get rid of the extra space between paragraphs? Or sometimes it's, how do I get rid of the extra spacing between the lines of a typed up address? So by default, Word will add extra spacing after paragraphs. And usually Word considers anytime you start a new line with the Enter key, creating a new paragraph. So there's a bunch of ways to go about this, but I'm going to show you 3. So the first thing we want to do is go to one of the lines we want to address. Make sure the cursor is there. Go to the Home tab, and in the paragraph section, there's a command with little up and down arrows. And when you roll over it, it says line and paragraph spacing. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And as you roll over the options, you can see the lines jump up and down. What we want is remove space after paragraphs. Once I click on that, you can see the extra spacing is gone. So if you want to do that for your whole document, you just select everything, choose that option, and it will crunch down all the spacing between the paragraphs in your document. So another thing you can do is go to the Layout tab. And here you can actually see how much spacing is going before and after the paragraphs. We have 0 points before and 8 points after. I'm not exactly sure about the unit of measure there. But if you wanted to play around with that, you can just use the arrow keys like so. As you can see, when I set it to 0, we're back to the kind of formatting that we wanted. You can also enter in your own values if you like. So once you make either of these adjustments, when you go to start a new paragraph, the formatting will hold. You won't get that extra spacing as you type on. So one other thing you can do if you're not using any other styling in your document is you can go to the Design tab, and where it says Paragraph Spacing, you can go ahead and click on that. And if I roll over Default, you'll see by default there is 0 spacing before, 8 points after, and you don't actually get single spacing. You get 1.08 in between all the other lines. So we can go ahead and go to no paragraph space, and that will eliminate the space after all the paragraphs, but it will also cut down your line spacing to 1, down from 1.08. So I'm not sure if you can even tell, but it might be something to take notice of. So if I click on that, again, if you don't have any other styling in your document, it should cut all of the spacing between paragraphs in the entire thing. So if you don't know about styling, basically if you go to the Home tab, there's all of these options for different font formatting for titles, subtitles, and headings and things like that. This is what I mean when I talk about styling. And I'm not going to talk too much more about it today because that is not something that comes up very often in the lab. Despite taking up half the Home tab, most people do not know what styling is. But with that, that is 3 ways to get rid of the spacing between paragraphs. Another topic of discussion that comes up in the lab is headers and footers. So the questions are usually, how do I create a header and how do I get out of the header? So headers and footers work basically the same way, so we'll cover them both right now. If you wanted to create a header, there's a couple of ways to do that. One way would be to click on the Insert tab. And then on the right side of the ribbon, we have header, footer, and page number. I'm just going to click on header and choose one of the templates. And then once we do so, we're in the header. Go ahead and click where it says Type Here and just start typing. Keep in mind, whenever you're working with the header and footer, you still have access to the other tabs in case you wanted to do a little extra formatting or styling. Also keep in mind, anytime you're working with the header or footer, the other is open too. So the header and footer always open at the same time. When you're all done, all you need to do is go to where it says Header and Footer Tools Design, click on the tab, and then on the right side of the ribbon, click Close Header and Footer, and you're back into the body of the document. If you wanted to edit the header or footer, again, you can just go to Insert, Header, Edit Header. You can also remove header if you wanted. And you're back in the header, and you can do your editing. So another way to get out of the header, besides the Close Header and Footer command in the ribbon, is you can just hit Escape. And that is a second way to get out of the header. So I'm going to go scroll down to the footer here and do things a little bit differently. Instead of using the ribbon to create a footer, I'm just going to double click in the bottom margin. And this works for the header as well. So once I double click on the double margin, you can see the footer is open, as is the header. And I'm not starting with a template, but I can just start typing. When I'm all done, instead of using Escape or the ribbon, you can also just double click on the body of the document, and you're out. So that's 2 ways of creating a header or footer and 3 ways of getting out. And just to show you another fringe case with headers and footers, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to go to Page Number. When I click on that, you see top of the page and bottom of the page. Those are basically just 2 differently formatted headers and footers. But then we also have page margins. So from our options here, I'm going to choose Accent Bar Left. And when I do that, you see I get a little guy on the left here, but it also opens the header and footer. And that's because this guy here, even though it's in the margins, when I click on it, you see it's a text box. And when I move it, it's actually anchored in the header. So if you ever see something in the margins and maybe it's not your document, but you wanted to edit it, keep in mind it's probably anchored in the header or the footer if you can't get to it normally. So that is the end of my discussion for now on headers and footers. Another common question I hear in the lab is, how can I reduce my document length? So whether it's a matter of cutting down your page count or keeping a couple lines from spilling over, there's a couple of things we can do. The first thing I usually recommend is changing the margin size. So by default, Word will give you a 1-inch margin all the way around, which I think is kind of excessive. So what you can do is go to Layout, go to Margins, and we'll go from normal to narrow, which is 0.5 inches all the way around. And now you can see the page and a half of text we had before all fits onto a single page. So I did the math, and you get about 30% more space to work with, which will turn 4 pages into 3 and 100 pages into 70. If the framing is a little bit too narrow for you and you have the space to give up, you can go to Margins, Custom Margins, and set the margins into something in between. So setting them to 0.75, you get something like this. I'm going to set everything back. We'll have a look at a couple other things we can try. I'm going to select all in the Home tab here. We'll go back to line and paragraph spacing. So we'll go ahead and remove space after paragraph. And when I do that, it actually looks kind of jumbled because we're working with 1.08 spacing, which is kind of tight. So maybe that doesn't work for us today, but it's something to try if you're working with maybe 1.5 or double spacing. Something else we can do is work with the line spacing. So again, we're at 1.08 line spacing by default. We can drop it down to 1.0. And if you can tell a difference, your eyes are better than mine. And while that's not a whole lot, it might actually get you an extra line on the page depending on your font. If you wanted to go a little leaner, you can go to line spacing options, and where it says single here, maybe instead go 0.9. And again, it's still pretty legible. You can't really go too small though. And again, it depends on the font you're using. But if you were to go to say like 0.6, you start getting a little stacking and it becomes illegible. Okay, so that's line spacing. Another thing we can try is the font size. So we're already in a pretty small font here at 11 point Calibri. But you can go down to 10 and you're still pretty legible there. But if that's getting a little too small, don't forget you can also do fractions. So maybe 10.5 does a nice balance of space saving and legibility. We'll go back to 11. And one final thing you can give a shot at, depending on what you're doing, is messing with the font style. So Calibri is a pretty small font as fonts go, but you might want to try Arial Narrow. And it's got a bit of a look to it, but at the same time, it saves you a whole bunch of space. So maybe not with Calibri, but if you were working with something like, I don't know, Arial Black, which is a bit of a wider font, definitely going from Arial Black to Arial will net you a little bit more space. Another popular concern in the lab is when things don't look quite the way a patron was expecting, or perhaps they clicked on something that changed the way things look and they don't know how to get things back to normal. So let's have a look at how to get into and out of those situations. So one is when the ribbon disappears. So let's look at that. If we go up to the top right corner here, kind of by the minimize and close icons, we have this icon here with a rectangle and an up arrow. And when you roll over it, it says ribbon display options. So if you click on that, by default, we show tabs and commands, but if you were to choose show tabs, the commands disappear. If we choose auto hide ribbon, we lose it all together. So people might use this to get a little bit more real estate on a smaller display. If you roll up to the top of the screen, you get a little blue bar. You click on the blue bar, brings everything back. Once you click on the document, it goes away again. So if you wanted to bring everything back permanently to the way things were, all you gotta do is go back up to the upper right corner, click on ribbon display options, click on show tabs and commands, and we're back. Another thing that I see is when you accidentally hide the white space at the top and bottom of your pages. So it'll make it look like your margins are gone, even though they're not. It's just a nice way of seeing more of your document at once. To make this happen, what you do is you go to the top or the bottom of one of the pages, and when you roll over your cursor just right, you get this little icon and it says double click to hide white space. So if I double click, you see it brings our first and second pages together by getting rid of all the white space at the top and bottom margins. The funny thing about this one is if you were to create a new document, like you screwed up, you don't know what you did, let's get things back to normal, it persists. So to get things back to normal, again, all we got to do is roll over the top or the bottom of the page, double click, and you can see your margins again. So another easy situation to get into and out of is when you click the show and hide paragraph symbol. So if you click on that, you see little paragraphs at the end of each paragraph. You see little dots for each space. You can even see the page break and a couple of other symbols depending on what you're doing. And these won't actually print out if you print, but it's just an easier way to see what's actually going on in your white space. So if things were jacked up and you didn't know what was going on, you can click on this symbol to get a better idea. Otherwise, to make it go away, all you got to do is click on the symbol again. And it's in the Home tab, in the Paragraph section. And again, it's the Show and Hide paragraph symbol. Another easy one is the Alt key. If you hit the Alt key, you get little numbers and letters for your quick access options and your tabs. And this is just a way of using shortcuts, and perhaps if you don't have a mouse available or you're just faster with your keys, you can use the Alt key to get into some shortcuts. Otherwise, to make it go away, all you do is hit the Alt key again, and they're gone. Another thing I've seen recently is markup. So sometimes you'll get a paper from somebody else. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to get into the situation by accident. And that's where you see a whole lot of red type. So if you go to the Review tab, under Tracking, you see it says All Markup here. All you gotta do is click on that, go to No Markup, and all of that disappears. So if you were to print, you wouldn't see any of the red type or the lines that appear on the side. Some other things you might see is if you go to Simple Markup, you just see the line without all the red type. And another thing that might happen is if you have track changes toggled on, you start typing with all markup selected, you'll see your typing is also red as well. So again, I've seen this where a patron received something and all these options were already ticked on and they didn't know what was going on. And again, it doesn't really do anything to how things print out, but if you're sending it to someone else, you probably don't want this on. So again, all you do is toggle off track changes and set all markup to no markup. There's a couple of things on the View tab that might throw you if you haven't seen them before. So let's have a look at it real quick. So again, we're on the View tab. And you'll notice by default we're on the print layout. If we go to read mode, we wind up with something like this. You can also get to here through the icon on the status bar. So if you accidentally click on that and you wind up here, you can go back by clicking on the print layout icon, again at the bottom on the status bar. You can go to View, click Edit Document. You can also just hit Escape, and that'll bring you back. If you've never seen web layout mode, that looks like this. So you can still edit and everything, it's just that everything goes from one side of the screen to the other without any page breaks. Outline mode looks like this. It's for moving paragraphs around with the little circles on the left. Get out of here, click on the Close Outline view. Go back to the View tab. And draft mode looks like this. So everything is thrown to the left side, and it's supposed to get rid of the headers and the footers so you can focus on just the text. And again, to get out of here, just go to Print Layout, and you are back to what you're accustomed to. So next to the views, we've got the ruler. If you need to get that, that's a checkbox right there. Click on it to get rid of it. Click on grid lines. This could be helpful for aligning pictures and things like that. Click on it to get rid of it. And then the navigation pane is this little guy on the left here for searching your document. Just X out of that, and it is gone. We also have the zooms, so if we goof around with the bar on the bottom here, this is how we adjust the zooms. If you want to set it back to 100%, you can just click on the little 100% command here, and it jumps right back. If you click on multiple pages, this is how we get a look like this. I haven't seen anybody ever work like this, and if your display is a normal size, it's probably too small. To get out of here, again, under View tab, you just click on one page, and you're back. Click on 100% to get it back to regular size. And one other weird thing you might see is if we click the Split command. With this, we can navigate the paper separately in two panes. To get out of the split mode, all you gotta do is click on Remove Split, and we're back. So if you have trouble editing your paper, you might be in read mode, again, like this. Click Escape. Or something else I've seen a bit is like this. You'll notice at the top it says Enable Editing in a little yellow bar here. It tells you to be careful. And you'll typically see this if you're getting something out of your email or downloading something off of a website. So anything that comes off the web, Word will automatically give you this Enable Editing bar and stick you into reading mode. So if you wanted to edit the document, all you gotta do is click Enable Editing. Get rid of the navigation pane, and we're back to what you're accustomed to. So something else that might keep you from doing any editing is if there is a window that's waiting for input. So for example, let's say I were going to not close the document, but if I accidentally had something and it was out of sight, you'll notice I can't click on the document. You can't do any editing until I answer this window. So it won't always be a Word window in specific, but just as a quick example, that is what I came up with. So you cancel out of that, and again, you should be able to do your editing. So if you don't know what's keeping your window locked, you can also open up the taskbar or the task manager by clicking on the taskbar with your right mouse button, selecting task manager, and you can go through anything that's open and close it so you can get back to editing your document. Next, I'm going to talk about the squiggly lines just a little bit because questions still come up in our lab. So we've got the red squiggly line, which indicates a spelling error, and the blue squiggly line, which indicates a grammar error. These lines aren't going to print out, however, they'll show up for anybody else you might send the document to, so it makes sense to get rid of the squiggly lines if you can. So if you get a squiggly line as you're typing, what you can do is reread what you wrote, make sure it is what you intended, and if you do see a mistake, either fix it manually. In this case, I combined the words hello and world. Or you can right-click on the squiggly line and you'll get some suggestions, as well as that option to ignore this error for the rest of the document, or add the error to your dictionary. So that might make sense if you made up a word that you intend on using a lot, or if there's a proper name that you use a lot, like if hello world was somebody's actual name, you can choose to add it to the dictionary and it will stop showing up for this document and all future documents. So I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to right-click on the grammar error here. And here they suggest reducing two spaces into one because they're considering hello a name. And this is just a reminder that spell check and grammar check are not perfect, so don't put all your faith in them, and to make sure to reread all your papers manually. So again, you can choose to also ignore this option as well. But the actual problem is we want some punctuation to indicate the end of a statement. And once I do, it still underlines hello, but in this case, it's not actually an error. There we go. And it's gone. So if you're unsure why there is an error there, it'll come up in the grammar check, which we'll look at in just a sec. But first I want to look at our next statement here where I did not make a spelling error, except I did. So if your spelling error results in creating another word that's still in the dictionary, it's not going to show up, which is reminder number 2 to make sure to reread your things manually because spell check is not perfect. So if you wanted to go ahead and run a spell check on your document, you can go to the Review tab, click on Spelling and Grammar. The shortcut is F7. You can also click on this little icon down here, which is an open book with an X on it if there's any proof errors, and a check mark if there's not. So when you do that, you'll get the suggestions again, as well as options to ignore once or ignore all the time. Add it to the dictionary, or whatever. So I'm going to change that. Now with the grammar error, you can get to see the explanation behind it. Again, they think there should be a single space between words, but that's not correct. So again, while spelling and grammar checks aren't 100%, I'd always recommend rereading over anything that gets underlined and check for extra words, missing words, extra punctuation, mixing punctuation. And Word in particular has issues with run-on sentences and passive voice, which you may or may not agree with. So moving on, you'll notice some more words here that are all underlined. However, they're all correctly spelled. So I've seen this come up more than once, and the issue here is we're not spell checking in the right language. So what we would do is highlight the words that we think are correct, go up to the Review tab, and in the Language section, click on Language, Set Proofing Language, and sure enough, it's set to Spanish. Go over to set it to English, click OK, and we're good. At the same time, if you're typing in another language, that's how you'd go about setting the proofing to a different language. So if you're wondering, like, hey, what about autocorrect? Why isn't all my words being corrected as I type? And for that, we can go look at language, language preferences, click on proofing, and then autocorrect options. And here is where you can see what you type on the left and what it's replaced with on the right. So if you were to spell back with the C and the K flipped, it gets automatically corrected. If you wanted to do your own, say you spell poopy with an IE, but you mean to spell it with a Y, you can go ahead and set that in there, click add, okay, okay. And now when you type poopy, hit enter, it gets corrected. I'm going to finish up today by talking a little bit about working with resume templates. So every resume template is created and organized a little bit differently, but I think you'll also find there's a lot of similarities that carry over as well. So there's a couple resume templates available on the main template page when you create a new document. Otherwise, if you have an online connection, you can do a search on the top bar and get a bunch more options. I'm going to select this one here, click create, and there we go. So again, a template is a nice way of getting a jump start on creating a document, especially if you're not very strong at formatting. And I will tell you right now, the number one question I get regarding working with resume templates is when you spill over into an extra page and decide you don't want to. So if I go to backspace or delete or whatever, we just can't seem to get rid of this second page. And while I'm sure there's a bunch of things we can do to get rid of it, some of which we've already discussed, I found that the quickest and easiest way to go about it is to set your cursor at the top of the page and set the font size to 1. So again, there's other things we can do, but that's just so quick and easy, I'm going to leave it at that. With that said, to go about working with your resume template, usually all you got to do is start clicking inside the brackets and adding your own content. Just like that. If you decide you don't want to include something, all you got to do is delete it. And at the same time, feel free to add your own stuff as well. Again, templates is just a jumping off point. Don't feel too constrained by it. So if you wanted to customize things a little bit, which I recommend you do because most HR departments have probably seen all of the popular Microsoft resume templates, is we go to this design tab here. We go to the design tab. On the far left, we have themes. As you roll over each theme, you can see the colors and the font change. Next, we can go ahead and change the styling. And to the right of that is the colors. And finally, the fonts. So again, things are pretty recognizable, but it's something. If you find you need more room or perhaps less room for your content, most templates are contained inside a table. So in this one, the borders showed up by default. But if they don't, what you do is make sure you select something inside of the resume, and that should bring up the Table Tools tab. If you go to Layout, just make sure the View Grid Lines is selected. Once you can see the grid lines, you can go ahead and click and drag on the cell borders to move things around. So if you're trying to customize things, like let's say the visual element here, you don't like this extra spot, you're trying to click on things and you can't, something that can be helpful is if you go to the Layout tab, go to the selection pane. Here you can see all of the objects in the document and how they're organized. So you see we have a bunch of things that are grayed out. Usually that indicates the objects are in the header. So by double clicking on the top or bottom margin, we get into the header or footer, just like we did before. And here you can see group 26 came alive. So now I'm able to select an element. If you still have trouble, if you go to the Drawing Tools tab, click on the Format tab, and go to Group. Sometimes you got to ungroup things first. And sometimes things are grouped more than once. So I do ungroup twice. Now we have no more groups, and we're free to select things individually and get rid of them. So that's all I really had as far as messing around with resumes. Just remember, if the resume comes with somebody else's picture, make sure to remove it. And that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a good day.